All right, so I am not quite finished this presentation, but I'm going to run through it anyway, even though it's not done, and you'll see some of the pieces that are missing. But I just wanted to give you guys an overview of where I'm at this point at the end of the week before the weekend, and I'll have to finish it maybe even on the weekend or for sure on Monday, and we'll go from there. So if you're watching on YouTube, please, I would suggest speed it up to 1.5 or even 2 times speed, and we'll save yourself a bunch of time. Anyway, here we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. The purpose of this public hearing is to present a town-initiated official plan amendment to livable Oakville for the Midtown Oakville Urban Growth Center. I will be sharing the podium tonight with Jill Stephen, Director of Transportation and Engineering, who will be presenting on the transportation elements of the proposed official plan amendment, and you'll be hearing from her in just a minute. Again, as this is a public statutory hearing, I just want to once again make it clear that if there is anyone watching this live stream and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095. And you will be connected to the meeting and you will be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. So the purpose of this meeting or of this hearing is to present a town-initiated official plan amendment to livable Oakville that implements the findings and the work we've been doing regarding the review of Midtown Oakville growth area. The proposed amendment is intended to update the land use policies and mapping related to Midtown. I want to emphasize that there's no decision being made tonight. And as we indicate in our staff report, the draft OPA is not final. The intent of introducing this draft OPA tonight is to both present staff's current thinking and to continue the discussion that we started last year. So once again, we are looking for input on the material we present tonight, and that contained in the draft OPA. There certainly will be further refinements based on the input we hear from council, stakeholders, and citizens, both tonight and through individual meetings that we've already been having and will continue to hold with stakeholders and residents in the coming months. So the proposed OPA being presented tonight is an evolution of the OPA we proposed last March. And just so you know, this OPA is intended to replace that one. So you can kind of take that one, set it aside and really focus in on this one. So what I've tried to show on this slide is kind of where we're at. Now, what this slide does not recognize, of course, is the 10 years of work and effort that have already been put into Midtown. And there's a sampling of this work that's included in the staff report, and I'm not going to repeat it all here. But since March of last year, Council has also held 2 workshops, one for transportation and one focused on urban design, to help gain a better understanding of the intricacies of planning for Midtown Oakville. And we also held a virtual public information session focused on Midtown last June. So now here we are back again for a second public statutory meeting tonight. And due to the upcoming municipal election this fall, we actually do not anticipate being able to return to council until next year. Because as I said, we fully anticipate there will be further refinements to this OPA after this. And so while we will not be returning to council until 2023, we will not be sitting idle. This presents a great opportunity for us to continue to meet with stakeholders and other members of the public and continue our work on Midtown and continue to refine the policies and concepts that are included here and more. So we do need to start, with a land use planning framework. We here at the town fall under, the jurisdiction of the province of Ontario, as well as the region of Halton. So that includes things up at the provincial level as the Planning Act, provincial policy statement, the growth plan, the Greenbelt plan, etc. Halton region has its official plans. And then that all feeds down and directs where we need to go in the town of Oakville. And so we have our official plan, which this official plan amendment is intending to amend. And then we have an implementation tool called our zoning bylaw that comes next. So once the policies are in place, we can move forward to actually implement zoning in Midtown, for example. So with respect to the province, some key things to highlight. The Planning Act provides that upper tier municipalities like Halton region may identify areas around a higher order transit station, such as Oakville GO, and designated as a protected major transit station area. Another piece that plays into tonight from the Planning Act are recent changes that have removed the authority for bonusing, height bonusing or density bonusing. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Another major policy document up at the provincial level is the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. There's a lot of stuff in there, but essentially it requires that Midtown Oakville, which is a strategic growth area, it's an urban growth center, and it's a major transit station area. It's all of these three things are to be planned as a complete community. And it indicates that Midtown Oakville will be planned to achieve 200 residents and jobs per gross hectare by 2031. And we'll get into some of this in a little bit later. At the regional level, there is the Halton Region's official plan, and a recent official plan amendment, ROPA 48, did a number of things that are important for Midtown. So it delineated the urban growth centers and major transit station areas in all of Halton. Midtown Oakville is both the urban growth center and a major transit station area. And so it's identified the boundary, which you can see in yellow on that map. That was part of ROPA 48. And then it requires local official plans like Livable Oakville to also identify the urban growth centers and major transit station areas in accordance with these boundaries. So now the region has said, this is the boundary. Now set your policies in your local plan mapping to match this. And of course, one of the things that the Halton Region's official plan does is it directs us to direct our higher density mixed use development to strategic growth areas, of which Midtown Oakville is probably our primary one. So like I said, the region directs us to include official plan policies, prescribe those minimum development densities that the province has set forward. And then it also requires our policies for strategic growth areas like Midtown to include a transportation network and urban design guidelines. And I highlight those two because those are two big pieces of what we're trying to work on for Midtown. And then of course, that all gets rolled down to the town, and we've done a lot of that work already. This is the town's urban structure, which directs future growth into our system of nodes and corridors. One of the major nodes being Midtown Oakville, again, as our urban growth center. So this is where Jill will chime in and provide her wonderful words on transportation from the slides that Akisha's preparing. I am hoping that that also Jill will be able to highlight some of the new things we've added to the transportation schedule, primarily the active transportation network, which hasn't previously been shown and was a big thing, a big message that we heard last time, that, hey, where's the active transportation network? Well, it's there. Now we're showing it and talk about some of the refinements to the network. So it's based on the EA, but refined on the east side of Trafalgar, also allowing for opportunities for further study to confirm or potentially realign what's being shown here. And you can see those things there. And I'd hope that maybe we touch on Lions Lane, but maybe it's not important. I'm not sure. Anywho, this is all Jill's work and it'll be wonderful. So this is the proposed land use schedule down here on the bottom that we're proposing in this current official plan amendment. The best way to explain what's happening here is to also show the existing in effect land use schedule, which is shown on top. So we're moving more towards a mixed style of development for both residential and employment, and we're acknowledging a shift in the office development market, which looks toward providing office space within walkable, mixed use and attractive communities, because that's where employees want to be and work. Not necessarily the standalone office tower as much. And I think Liberty Village, for example, is a well-known example of this. So what we've done is we've extended the urban core designation, essentially the purple designation, which is the town's mixed use designation, throughout most of Midtown, primarily north of the tracks, but also south of the tracks along Cornwall Road as well. And we've left one little bit of office employment on the east side, and primarily that's just a factor of the proximity to the rail yard, which essentially requires a 300-meter separation distance between it and any residential. And that brings us to about where you're looking that office employment is from that rail yard. We've also removed the districts. You can see the districts were labeled here because I think it was misleading. It's not been our intent to essentially have different areas with very different characteristics. And so it's a little bit misleading to talk about districts. And so we've removed them from this schedule. And really it's easier to talk about Midtown in terms of its quadrants, right? Either north of the tracks or south of the tracks or east of Trafalgar or west of Trafalgar. And one of the other new things that we have identified on this schedule is a public parks and open space system, which we haven't done before. And we felt it was very important because parks and open space are such a big part of what Midtown needs to become, that we needed to identify locations and the network that we would like to achieve in terms of parks. So going back to the land uses, here's the urban core. You can see that we've extended it. It's in the purple. Here's some pictures of what that could mean in terms of the type of development that we would be looking for. And then, of course, the office employment, and again, some images to show that we're looking for higher density employment uses to help complement the mixed use portions of Midtown as well. So the public realm, which is essentially all the spaces in between the buildings, public spaces in between buildings. So that includes the streets, that includes parks, it includes open space, squares, all those type of things. That's what the public realm is all about. And that's what we're really emphasizing through this official plan amendment. And it's important to understand that these won't be your typical parks and open spaces that you see otherwise in our suburban neighborhoods, and they're intended to be more of an urban style. I will note that while the intent for this is all to be public, only about 45% of the land shown here is already within town ownership, and the other 55% the town would look to obtain through either dedication as part of parkland requirements or potentially purchasing it using cash in lieu funds as we receive them. So we've broken up the public ground or the parks and open space system into a number of different components that'll quickly run through here. So one of them is the promenades, and these are intended to be essentially extensions of the right of way to provide really active uses, places for people to hang out, walk along an avenue, but it's extra space, extra elbow room. That's basically vehicle free other than active transportation vehicles. And it's meant to be lush, green, attractive places to be and hang out. Urban squares, similar. They're of a smaller scale. They're in strategic locations, potentially on corners that are intended to complement and enhance the development that around them and have these developments kind of spill out onto them. But they're intended to be, again, gathering places for people living and working in the community. We've got public commons, which tend to be a little bit larger. That again, it's about creating places that attract people, that are great, for walking your dog. Maybe there's a little bit larger spaces you could, toss a ball around with your family, or just hang out under a tree and read a book. It could incorporate water features. And then of course, we've already got Cornwall Sports Park, which currently has some baseball diamonds on it. All of those intended to be active places for people who live within the community. And then we also have connectors, and these are elements that are intended to connect a lot of these places together, whether it's the promenades, the urban squares, the open space along the hydro corridor lands, those type of things, the active transportation crossing across the QEW and bring those into Midtown. That's what these connector pieces are all about, and a very important part of the parks and public open space system to be part of our public realm. So all of that is public, but this is intended to be complemented with a POPs network, or a privately owned public space. So these are spaces that likely within the blocks that are, as they get developed, that are owned privately, but allow the public to come in at grade and move through the site and in and through the site. And so it's a combination of having these public areas, these public spaces, as well as the privately owned spaces that allow the public to access them. And all of these work together to create what I would say is the full parks and open space system for Midtown. I'll just give you an example of, we just recently received an application in Midtown, and this is from their model of their internal, essentially a POP space, privately owned public space, where people can move through and hang out, both residents that live here as well as others who come to visit Midtown. So another big piece to our Midtown policies is that we're shifting away from using building heights to describe the overall amount of development that's permitted in Midtown to a floor space index. Well, what is a floor space index, you may ask? And so it's important that we describe what this is. So what this means is, and the definition is that you take the gross floor area. So that's essentially all of the floors of a building, no matter how they're configured, and you divide it by the area of a lot. So for example, and you can see on this left side, here's your lot area over here. And if you cover half of that lot with 2 stories, you've essentially hit an FSI of 1, because you've taken the area of the lot, split it in 2, and stacked it on top of each other. If you didn't choose to do that, and you built property line to property line from front to back and left to right at 1 story, you would also have an FSI of 1. So these two are both FSIs of 1. Same thing as if you only cover a quarter of the lot and you stack up 4 stories, you're still only at a floor space index of 1. So as you can see, the amount of floor space that gets developed in each of these examples is identical. How it's configured changes. Well, why is that important? And I'll get into that right here. So under the current policies, there's a maximum height. And what often happens, and that's what's represented by this dashed line. And what often happens is when applications come in, a developer wants to maximize what they're allowed to build. And so we've got guidelines to say, okay, your podium needs to be this height. And then anything above it, needs to be a slender tower or a certain floor area. And so you end up getting buildings that all kind of go up to the same height. But if we did that across all of Midtown, that's not something that we would desire. We're actually looking to have variation in height. The problem being when someone applies and they come in, say with 2, let's say 2 of these are 1 application, and they both come in and they want to build this much floor area. And through the review of our application, we say, yeah, we know you're allowed to go up to this height, but we want building height variation. Well, because this is the max, it's not like you can extend this one up when you drop this one down and maintain the same amount of floor area. Effectively, we're almost setting ourselves up for failure because we're asking a developer to cut out an amount of development that they would otherwise be permitted to build in order to get building height variation. So if you shift to a floor space index, as we were showing on the previous slide, there's different ways of accommodating the same amount of floor area. So for example, you could take a portion off of this building and add it onto this one and extend that one up a little higher. Likewise, you could do the same thing here. And you can see in this gray area, you now start to get a better skyline with varying building heights in it, but maintaining the same amount of floor area, which is represented by the gray shading. And that, in a nutshell, is essentially why we are looking to shift towards floor space index to control the amount of development that we're looking at in Midtown. And it's important to say we're shifting to floor space index, but it also comes part and parcel with really firm guidelines in terms of how the buildings are built, right? So you can't have when you do a tall building, we don't want it to be super wide as well, because that tends to block sunshine. So it's a matter of having slim towers if you're going to go up, and then describing, how that needs to be on top of podiums, because it's the podiums at the ground level that start to create that edge and frame the public realm. Whereas once you step things back to the slimmer towers, those kind of get a little bit removed from from your mind as you're walking down a street. So this here is just, I thought I'd give an example of a recent application we've come in with, and you can see it's starting to have some of that building height variation that we're talking about. But this gives you a sense of, of the podiums to, and really kind of really address the street level, as well as some of the height that we would likely be needing in order to meet our minimums. And I'll get into that in a minute as well. So yeah, we need to determine, well, what's the minimum floor space index? What's the minimum amount of development that we need in order to meet the growth plan projections of 200 people and jobs per hectare? So Midtown Oakville, we've got the boundary established by Halton Region. It's 103 hectares of gross area. So if you take those 200 people and jobs per hectare that the growth plan requires us to plan for, you multiply it by 103 hectares, that's essentially 20,600 residents and jobs minimum that we need to accommodate in Midtown. Of course, not all of this gross area can actually be redeveloped to accommodate people and jobs. So I'll pull in the land use schedule in behind here to help illustrate things. So we can't build on the railway. We can't redevelop along, the parking garage. The hydro corridor lands are needed to be kept open all the way along. And of course, then there's some of the Metrolinx parking is provided within that corridor, but really that space, including a bus loop, is not going to be redeveloped with buildings. Having said that, perhaps Metrolinx could do something down the road in terms of building above their space, but I think the hydro corridor lands and the railway corridor really kind of prevent that from happening. Then we also need to take out the parks and open space network, because we're not building on those parks and open spaces at all. They're a needed component to provide recreational space for the people who live here. So we're not building on those either. And then now I'll throw in the transportation network in behind, schedule L3, and we need to remove the street network based on the right-of-way widths that were provided on the transportation schedule. We are now left with these parcels. So these are the parcels that theoretically can be redeveloped. And this is where those people and jobs will go. This is only 43 hectares. So it's only about 40% of the gross amount that we had to start with that actually can be redeveloped with housing and office space and other jobs and things like that. So if we take the minimum, and I'm going to stress minimum again, 20,600 people and jobs that we require in Midtown, and you put them on 43 net hectares, that's essentially 480 people and jobs per net hectare. So I'm not trying to confuse you with numbers or anything, but I'm trying to explain why we need the densities that we do in order to achieve the growth plan requirements for Midtown. So then we took that density and equated it to a minimum floor space index. And there's a lot of assumptions that go into that in terms of unit size, how many people do you get in a unit, how much space on a, what's your building efficiency factor, all those kind of things. But essentially staff took that, we crunched the numbers, and we came out with these minimum floor space indices or indexes that we would need in order to accommodate the minimum number of people and jobs that were required to. And that's what's reflected by the lower end of the density ranges on schedule L2. So you can see it's 4 FSI north of the tracks, 2.5 FSI south of the tracks, and 1.5 FSI in the office employment and community commercial area on the right. So is it enough to simply set the minimum and leave it at that, or even say, hey, why can't this be our maximum? So I'm going to argue that the answer to that is no. We need to allow for more than the minimum. And in fact, the Planning Act specifically encourages municipalities to provide more than the maximum. So one of the reasons for this is the timing of when we need to achieve that minimum density. It's not just that we have to plan for it, it's also a timing piece. So the growth plan says this needs to happen by 2031. Halton Region's recent integrated growth management work suggests that Midtown won't meet this minimum until sometime between 2041 and 2051. But the point is, the timing is important. So at the minimum FSI, we'd need every single one of these parcels that are shown here to redevelop, all of them to redevelop in order to just meet the minimum. Well, I don't think that's realistic to think that we're going to have all of those redevelop, particularly in the short term, say in the next 10 years to get us to 2031. And so I'm thinking of, there's parcels in here that are owned by Metrolinx. Metrolinx has indicated that parking is still very important to them, and they're not intending to part with any parking spot yet. So redevelopment of Metrolinx lands is probably more longer term than it is short term. There's very successful businesses that are operating in Midtown, and some of the more kind of prominent ones would be, say, like a Home Depot. They've indicated they have no intention to redevelop in the short term. There's places like the PwC building, relatively recent, as well as the WSP building. These parcels aren't going to redevelop anytime soon at all, and continue to operate and be a part of Midtown moving forward. But if they're not intending to develop in the short term, we need, just for that reason alone, we need to allow the parcels that can be redeveloped in the short term to accommodate more than just the minimum. And another important piece to setting a maximum is infrastructure planning. One, it really helps to have a sense of what the full build out would be in terms of, hey, what's the maximum amount of infrastructure we need to plan for? And it also allows a tool for the town to kind of incent elements that might not otherwise happen in Midtown to happen, where they might not otherwise happen on their own. So we have established, and I really should show a schedule of the maximum. So I'll quickly run back to the minimum density schedule, but the maximums here are intended to allow for that additional development, so that, some applicants that are ready to come in can actually apply for more than the minimum, which we're also encouraged to do, so that we can start to potentially reach the minimum we need by the date that we have, and then allow Midtown to continue to develop for decades beyond into the future. I mean, as one of my colleagues put it, we're really planning for forever here, not just to 2031, 41, or even 2051. This is and beyond, because Midtown, quite frankly, will continue to develop for decades to come. So moving back to these incentives, if we put a maximum FSI on there, what that allows the town to do is to then start to incent some of the things that we really want. So, for example, we need land for roads and for parks. One of the things that developers are reticent to give up is land, but particularly because it has a development potential for it. So they would potentially rather, pay cash in lieu for parks and things like that. So, and they would rather have the town, say, expropriate for roads rather than conveying that land upfront as part of development. So, in an attempt to try and address that concern, we've proposed policies that would allow the landowner to retain the development potential of any land they give up for public parks, or provide as parkland dedication, as well as roads, future roads in Midtown. I think right now the policies specify local roads only, but I think as we move forward, we're going to consider whether that can also apply to essentially any road in Midtown, so that if land is given up, that development potential, that FSI that would apply to that land, can be transferred to the net or the retained parcel, the parcel that would then be developed after you take out the parks and roads. And then similarly, in buildings where developers typically want to put in the uses that will provide them a return on their investment, they may be less reluctant or less willing to voluntarily provide things like affordable units, or even larger units for housing for households with children. They may rather put in residential uses instead of office space, depending on what the office market is like. So these things may not happen on their own. So if we allow some of these things to be exempt from the FSI calculation, meaning that they could potentially build above the maximum FSI if they provide these things, because they wouldn't count. And so your building could potentially be a little bit taller, for example, for things like affordable units, for things like schools. Schools in the long term for Midtown are intended to be incorporated into buildings in a mixed use style environment. That would include playgrounds. Maybe you put them up on the top of a podium, for example. And so why not provide an incentive for developers to do this? And same with office space and even bicycle maintenance. I know we already require bicycle parking, but bicycle maintenance and care of bicycles require space as well. So let's incent the provision of those within the buildings in Midtown. So those are some of the things that have proposed in our official plan amendment for further consideration. Even some of the discussions we've had recently since the official plan amendment was released is, could we do the same thing for large format grocery stores? Could we do the same things for hotels, maybe daycares, or even above ground parking that could be converted to other uses in the fullness of time as parking demand may diminish in Midtown? I thought about maybe showing a graphic to illustrate it, kind of like I did last time, right? To color where these uses are going in, to show the difference between a building without some of these desired uses and ones with, and show the difference in the FSI overall. I thought maybe that could be good. I think we need to talk about this maximum height metric, which has garnered some attention. So if we're moving away from maximum building heights, why do we still have one? Why do we still have a metric in the OPA, and how is this determined? So part of it is we don't want to, on large sites, we don't want all of that FSI potential to be grouped into one building and create for one single super tall building on a parcel. We would like to have it distributed between a number of buildings. Granted, we want building height variation, but we want to distribute it across a site. But on the other hand, when you have a small site that can maybe only have one building, the building height metric needed to be high enough to still allow that, say, 10 FSI, without reaching that maximum height that we would set, to try and make sure that on larger sites there's more than one building. And we could do some graphics to show this. We need to talk about inclusionary zoning. That's been a question. So essentially, this is a little bit different than incentivizing the provision of affordable units like we're doing through the OPA. Inclusionary zoning is a tool that allows municipalities to require the inclusion of affordable housing units within a building that has other residential units. And then these units need to be maintained as affordable housing units over time. So the Planning Act enables municipalities to adopt inclusionary zoning policies for major transit station areas, which Midtown is one of them. So we could do this in Midtown. But in order to do that, Oakville Council needs to adopt the enabling general policies in the official plan. So that would be something that could be done through our municipal comprehensive review of our local official plan. And that could come forward in the next little while. It wouldn't be part of the Midtown OPA. And then, of course, these policies need to be based on an assessment report, a housing assessment report, which I believe can either be conducted by the town or commissioned by the town or Halton Region, but you do need that assessment report done before you can require the inclusion of affordable housing units. And I know Burlington is undergoing or getting their assessment report prepared as we speak. So then we need to talk about coordination, cost sharing, how we're no longer proposing a landowners group, that we're working to use the tools available to the town, like town-wide development charges, community benefit charge, parkland dedication, local service policy, and potentially an area-specific development charge. And maybe just kind of describe a little bit more about what we're doing and how we're moving forward with that. And then really talk about the implementation strategy, that this OPA is not the end, it's just the beginning. There's so many things that we need to implement and coordinate in terms of servicing, in terms of roadways, in terms of parks, in terms of urban design guidelines, all of those kind of things, feasibility analyses. We need to confirm things potentially through EAs on our roads, all those kind of things. So Functional servicing report, we're starting to work on that. And those are all pieces that are needed to implement Midtown. And this official plan amendment is essentially just kind of the beginning of it all. Then we could come back and reiterate where we are at our public stat meeting, and that, you know, we're looking to come back in 2023, as I described earlier, and then we could open it up for questions. So I know I need to refine some of my words through that, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview of where I've gotten thus far, and we can talk more on Monday, or you can provide me feedback through an email, whichever you prefer. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Talk to you soon.